Samuel L. Jackson entered the Good Morning America's studio with his usual confident stride, his presence instantly filling the room with an energy that was both electric and unpredictable. The audience clapped enthusiastically. The camera panned over to George Stephanopoulos, who stood poised with his trademark half-smile, his eyes betraying a flicker of anticipation that hinted at the storm brewing beneath the surface. The two shook hands briefly and took their seats across from one another, the air already charged with the unspoken tension that often precedes the kind of televised clash that would be talked about for days to come. George began the interview with a question about Jackson's recent film, a political thriller that had already sparked heated debates across the country. Jackson nodded and offered his insights, his voice calm, but his tone edged with the unmistakable intensity that had made him a Hollywood legend. George nodded politely, but then shifted the conversation toward the film's controversial themes, specifically its critique of modern American leadership and systemic corruption. He asked Jackson if he felt he was sending the wrong message during such a polarized time in the nation. Jackson leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he responded that art was not supposed to make people comfortable, and that the truth had never been polite. He said that if people were offended, maybe it was because the message hit too close to home. George replied that with a platform as large as Jackson's came a responsibility not to inflame tensions. Jackson shot back, saying that silence was a bigger threat than speaking out, and that pretending everything was fine only benefited those who profited from chaos. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing the first rumblings of a deeper conflict. George then brought up comments Jackson had made in a previous interview about politicians being more like performers than leaders. Jackson's jaw clenched slightly, his voice rising as he said that he stood by every word and that too many people in power were more concerned with their image than with justice. George interrupted, asking whether it was fair to generalize all political figures. Jackson turned to face him fully, his voice now commanding as he said that when the system was broken, the problem was not with pointing fingers, it was with pretending there were no hands to point at. George attempted to steer the conversation back to the film, but Jackson was not letting go. He said that everything was connected and that what people saw on screen was just a reflection of what they refused to see in real life. George raised his eyebrows, asking if Jackson considered himself more of an activist than an actor. Jackson laughed sharply, saying that he did not need labels to speak the truth, and that if telling the truth made people uncomfortable, that was not his problem. The audience murmured again, some nodding in agreement, others clearly uneasy with the direction things were going. George pressed on, saying that many viewers believed celebrity should entertain, not lecture. Jackson leaned in, his tone like thunder rolling in, as he said that entertainers had always been the ones to speak out when others were too scared, and that history remembered those who stood up, not those who stayed quiet. The studio was now buzzing with tension as the confrontation edged closer to boiling over, both men locked in a battle of words that neither seemed willing to lose. George adjusted his posture, trying to maintain his composure, while subtly shifting the energy back into his control, but Samuel L. Jackson was far from done, his voice steady yet laced with unmistakable fury, as he declared that media gatekeepers often chose comfort over confrontation, and that playing nice with the truth was how injustice flourished. George interjected calmly, stating that journalism was about balance, about hearing both sides, and Jackson's lips curled into a smirk as he shot back that not all sides deserved equal weight, that giving a microphone to falsehoods in the name of balance was like pouring gasoline on a fire and calling it even-handed. Reporting the studio lights seemed hotter. Now the room felt tighter, the audience caught in the gravitational pull of a clash that felt less like an interview and more like a reckoning. George attempted to redirect the dialogue, asking Jackson if he believed his approach risked alienating parts of his audience. Jackson's laugh echoed through the set, sharp and unfiltered, as he responded that he was not in the business of coddling the comfortable, but in challenging the complacent. He said that art was a mirror, and if people were afraid of their own reflection, that was not his concern. George tried again, saying that viewers looked to figures like Jackson for hope, not division. Jackson leaned forward, eyes ablaze, and said that real hope did not come from sugar-coated sound bites. It came from truth, from acknowledging the rot and digging it out, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable the process might be. George paused, visibly thrown by the intensity and conviction of Jackson's words, before offering a measured comment about the responsibility of influence. Jackson interrupted him firmly, saying that the only real responsibility was to speak with honesty and act with courage, that staying silent in the face of corruption was complicity, and that the time for polite conversations was over. The audience erupted into a mix of applause and gasps, some visibly moved, others visibly shaken. George turned slightly toward the camera, his expression tight, as he tried to maintain control of the live segment, but the dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Jackson now fully commanding the space in front of him, George tried to inject a softer question, something about Jackson's philanthropic work, but the actor waved it off, saying he would not be sanitized for ratings, that this platform was an opportunity and he would not waste it with fluff. The tension was now a living thing, slithering through the studio, its weight pressing on everyone present. George leaned forward once more, asking if Jackson truly believed that his confrontational salute
so that as a send away as else and this subsid away and so as and so was so snack of sense so
Tone helped build understanding. Jackson replied that sometimes you had to raise your voice to be heard, that change had never come quietly, and that the people who demanded politeness were often the ones most threatened by progress. The silence that followed his statement was profound, like the breath before a storm. George blinked, adjusted his tie, and said they would take a quick break, but Jackson leaned into the microphone and said, "No, we are not done yet."